Hello, and welcome to another episode of I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness, a first responder mental health podcast. I'm your host, Erin Jane, and today I am joined by the wonderful Hayley, who is a former senior sergeant with a state police force in Australia. Thanks for joining us, Hayley.
Thanks, Erin. Thanks so much for having me. I'm absolutely delighted to be here.
Wonderful to have you. All right, so I think we'll just jump straight on into it. So we actually have a mutual friend in common, but I have not had the pleasure to meet you before. So this is everything we're going to hear today is going to be brand new for me as well as our listeners. So I guess Hayley, basically we'll just dive on in, and I guess I just sort of like to ask what made you want to join the job to become a police officer, and sort of like how old were you, and where did that decision come from in your life?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I joined when I was 20. So I was the baby of my squad.
I bet you
Um,
were.
yeah. So it's sort of beforehand, I did lots of jobs. I always had a great work ethic and always sort of was keen to earn some cash. But I think that one of the main things that drew me to the police force or policing in general is the variety. And I
Mhm.
think that was a big tipping point for me is I get quite bored quite easily. So to know that every day would be different
Mhm.
was a big draw card for me. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I can assume, something that you definitely got in that line of work.
Yes. Yes. No one day was the same. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. And so, talk to me about like sort of the process of joining. Like, was it like a quick one for you? Did it take a while? And then, tell me about your academy experience.
Yeah, so I joined in 2006, and at that time, there was a big drive to get more women in policing. So,
Hmm.
in comparison to some of my male counterparts, I had quite a quick recruiting process.
Yeah.
I think it took from start to finish maybe 6 months
Hmm.
by the time I applied to actually walk through the gates at the academy. And
Yeah.
I love the academy. I had so much fun. We had such a good squad. There was a lot
Yeah.
going on. It was a very high recruiting drive
Yeah.
that year. So it was just chock a block. And,
Yeah.
again, the variety sort of started from day one and made some lifelong friends.
Hmm.
And yeah, I had a blast.
Yeah. Were you like a double squad, a single squad?
I was a double squad. So
Hmm.
I think that there was just double squads the whole year and they were pumping them out maybe every fortnight or a month. So
Yeah.
there was a lot going on.
Yeah. I started in October '06, so I wonder if
Ah,
were
I
you
was in
there?
May of '06.
As in, you started or graduated?
Started in May.
So man, we would have like what? How good's my
Yeah, because
maths?
I
We
would
would have
have,
like
was it
maybe
May?
just crossed paths. May, June, July,
Maybe.
August, September, October, or like, oh, maybe I'd like you just graduated as I started or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh wow, we must
How
have just
funny.
missed each other. That's so funny. So I mean, yeah, and I think that that academy experience too, it's so unique, and it's you know like I was sort of had like that a similar thing was like I met the girl who's been my best friend on like day one, and we've been attached to the hip ever since, and it's that formative experience that you have with people, and then you go on to perform the same role, and then you're like learning and experiencing everything like at the same time together. Like I think it really like can create those amazing bonds with people that like you said can be really like lifelong experience, friendships.
Yeah, and I think that's the first taste that you get of the blue family that sort of everyone talks about, and the people that you spend those days with, and throughout your career as well. It does have quite a family, quite a dysfunctional family feel to it as well.
Well, I guess that reflects real life then, doesn't
Yep.
it? Okay, so then you would have sort of spent that roughly like that 5 month, 20-week period in the academy back then.
Yes.
And so talk to me about like what happened after you graduated. Where'd you go? What did you do? All that kind of
Yes. Yeah, so after I graduated, I spent most of my time in general duties and working at some of the busiest police stations across the state. So I was always very busy.
stuff.
And look, I really enjoyed uniform. Working in general duties, it had the variety that I needed, that I wanted,
Yeah.
and throughout my career, I became fascinated by people's behaviour and the culture of the organisation and the little subcultures that each police station had.
Yeah.
Um, and so a lot of my role and focus was really around mentoring and coaching junior
Mm-hmm.
people as I sort of became a little bit more senior. So that's
Yeah.
what I really like to focus on. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's really nice. It's good to
Yeah.
be a junior member and actually find those senior members who are actually willing to, pass the baton and give you that knowledge as opposed to like, I think, I don't know if you were the same as me, but sometimes when you got out there as a junior burger and you'd meet them and they'd just be so gruff and so grumpy and it was like, come on, mate, like you were fucking here once too. Like,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
we're all here to do the same job. We're all here to like help and learn and yeah, sometimes they would just be less than friendly.
Yeah, and I think that that's probably why I became really interested in that side of things
Mhm.
because, I mean, you can, half a dozen names immediately come to my head of, the first couple of weeks that you're in a police station of
Yeah.
people that were either super helpful or just
Yeah.
super not, and the
Yeah.
impact that that could have. I remember one of my first watch house shifts. The senior Connie said, "Oh, there's someone at the counter. Go out and deal with them." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So I said, "Oh, hi, how can I help you?" And this bloke goes, "I'm just here to sign on," which means he was reporting for bail. And
Yeah.
I didn't know what that meant. So, dude, and I've gone, "Sorry, what does
Um,
that mean?" And then I had this crook tell me tell
oh,
me where to go in the filing cabinet. My surname's this. All you do is you just pop out the form, love, and bring that over to me, and I'll sign it for you. And then you just pop it back. Make sure that you write down your number on, your registered number on the sign-in book, just to say that you were here. And I've gone, oh my gosh. Wouldn't it have
oh
been
my
better
God.
if I had a senior member out there with me, maybe giving me a chop out? But yeah, so it's stuff
Yeah.
like that that you go, oh,
Oh.
how embarrassing.
Oh my God, that is like, oh, I could just like imagine that happening. Seriously.
Oh,
But some of those old crooks are like, actually like pretty good value to
yeah,
to interact with. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
I know if you ever worked at a station with cells, but some of like the older kind of inmates would be like, yes miss, and they'd like keep the
yeah,
troublesome ones in line because they knew then they wouldn't get their like hot Milo before bed, and that was
yeah,
like a high crime and misdemeanor. So you'd be
yeah,
like, hey mate, can you just that bloke, can you just get him to pull his head in? And he'd be like, no worries
yeah,
miss.
exactly. And I'll put an extra sugar in your Milo for you too.
Exactly, you get a couple of extra bickies, mate, like just on the
Yeah,
side.
yeah,
Oh my
funny.
goodness. So did you like once you hit your training station, did you stay primarily like sort of either in a city or suburban? Did you ever go up bush?
I
Where did you
was
bounce
I
around
was
to?
always suburban for most of my career until probably the
Mhm.
last 5 or so years when I went in a city in a different in a corporate role, I suppose.
Okay.
So yeah, always suburban. Worked at police stations that had cells, and others that didn't. So yeah, a good variety
Mhm.
of different police stations.
Yeah. And so and how long were you in the job all up?
15 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
So
So a
I was
fair
in
length of time.
yeah, so I was promoted to sergeant quite early in my career. So I was in for, I think, 8.5 years
Mhm.
before getting promoted, and I was upgraded for, I think, 12 or 18 months prior to that. So I was quite
Okay.
young. I think at the time there was 14% of female sergeants across the organisation.
Yeah.
And, I was, how old was I? I was I was 29 when I was promoted. And the
Yeah.
average age at that time of sergeants was 47.
I was gonna say, yeah, I'm
And
assuming, and mostly male.
mostly male, exactly. And, here I am as a 29-year-old and, having spent 8.5 years in the job when the average serving age or the average serving length of time for a sergeant at that stage was 23 years. So I
Wow.
came up against quite a lot of resistance.
Yeah.
I was, I talk about my sort of power plays throughout my career. And
Mhm.
while they're my power plays, I think they were also my biggest hurdles as well. And, that was that I was very young for
Mhm.
the positions that I held. I was very junior as well, and I was a woman. So I could agitate the system just by being in the room because I was completely
Yeah.
different to what was expected of that rank.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was promoted to sergeant, the amount of times people would look at me and say, "Are you a real sergeant?" Just because I was the opposite of what you would
Yeah.
expect,
Yeah.
to have as a sergeant.
Yeah. No, I came across sort of similar things in like a detective role, and I still remember we had someone from like a suburban CI come to our office in town because I think we had like crossover jobs or something like that. And I don't know if like I let them into the office or whatever it was, and having a chat, saying g'day, blah blah blah, and then everyone goes to go into like the conference room, and the detective sergeant of like the suburban one turned around to like close the door, and I was like coming behind him, and he turned around and he was like, "Oh no, this is just for investigating members." Because he assumed I was like a receptionist or the secretary or a TIO or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
He like literally like I would have had my lanyard on, I would have had my yellow Freddy, and yet there was just no. He just like took one look at me and was like, "Oh, she's like a receptionist or a secretary or
She
whatever,"
doesn't belong
and like.
here.
And I think whoever it was actually had to turn around and be like, she's the investigating member. And he was like, oh. So
Oh,
I think it was kind of common at certain stages along that way.
yeah.
How did you deal with that? Like, in terms of did you take it personally? Was it just water off a duck's back? How did you navigate those sort
Ah,
of challenging personalities that you may have had to deal with along the way?
yeah, it's tricky, right? Because I'm someone that's quite I appear confident, and I'm not backwards in coming forwards. I'm very opinionated.
Yeah,
So in that respect, it wasn't ever confrontational, but I would challenge people
yeah,
because I deserve to be there.
yeah,
So it was sort of water off a duck's back in many ways because I know that it was confronting for them to have someone like me in that sort of position that they hadn't experienced before. And I look back now and I go, I'm now 37 and I sort of go, would I handle being told what to do by someone by someone that a lot younger than me? Like I had
yeah,
members that were well into their 60s.
yeah.
And having a supervisor that's younger than you, it's a pretty hard thing to swallow at times.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's nice that you actually bothered to look at it from that perspective because I don't think everyone would. Like it's good that you can like, yeah, just try to go, oh, okay, that would have been confronting for them
Yeah,
and all that kind of thing.
yeah,
And so how did you just stay at the one position as a sergeant, or did you go like elsewhere throughout your time then?
yeah. So I stayed between two police stations in the same area for my
Mhm.
time as a sergeant, and I think that that's when the type of work that I was doing and the people that I was dealing with started impacting my mental health. Like as soon as I was promoted, and I was promoted to a different area that I had never, probably rarely driven through, let alone knew anyone there. So it was sort of interesting
Yeah.
walking into an environment for the first time, not knowing anyone.
Yeah.
And then it was quite clear. quite quickly that there was some pretty shitty workplace behaviours and workplace practices that were going on.
Okay.
And, I had been brought in to help with changing the culture.
Uh-huh.
And,
The whole
that
chestnut.
that's a beast in itself, right? Like,
Yeah.
how do you go in and, for the most part, acting pretty solo or with a selected few people and trying
Yeah.
to change, the culture of not only one police station, but in the whole area. So we had 3 police stations. So,
Okay.
that was quite a difficult time. And for a
Mhm.
good couple of years, it was really, really tough. And
Mhm.
the longer it went on, the more impact that being there really had on me. And
Mhm.
I can look back now and see how far I've come, but also to sort of look back and go, wow, I actually dealt with all of that shit. It's kind of
Yeah.
scary in a way. So my
Yeah.
journey, and while this was going on, I was also looking at getting upgraded to a senior sergeant and going down the promotion bandwagon as
Ah,
well.
yeah.
And then, if I thought that wasn't enough, I'd done temps at a CI unit for a couple of months, but
Mhm.
other than that, my whole career was in general duties. So
Yeah.
to add some sort of diversity to my kit, I decided that I would do some tertiary studies. So I enrolled to do a grad cert of leadership and management. So I had a lot going on.
Sounds like it.
There was a lot going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And so, I guess probably like my main question is, uh, how did you cope? Like you've mentioned the fact that your mental health started to struggle, and that would most likely have like impacted you outside of like the workplace. Like what was it like for you back then?
Yeah, I look back now and I wasn't aware of what was going on, but my whole nervous system was just, there was no steady state. So I didn't really know. I'd get up in the morning and the hypervigilance would start. So as soon as I woke up, if I slept,
Yeah.
then there'd be that automatic activation of my fight flight response.
Yeah.
And, that would send me into a state of hypervigilance or hyper arousal throughout the whole
Hmm.
day, throughout whatever I was doing,
Yep.
shift wise. And then when I came home, it was the complete opposite. So there was that just full, complete and utter collapse of,
Yep.
um, you know, being unable to really do anything else. It's sort of that hypo arousal mode where, it was
Mm.
numbness, it was, disassociating, withdrawing. So
Yeah.
over time, and this was over years this happened for, so there was no room in between those two states of my nervous system. So it was either this
Yeah.
hypervigilance, hyperarousal, always being switched on, or at the other end of the scale, just not being available for absolutely anything. So it really impacted
Yeah.
on, my family life, on my kids, on my husband, on, what. And like, I had all the maladaptive coping strategies down pat. Like, I was so good at those. Like,
Yeah.
the drinking, the overworking,
Yeah.
the withdrawing from family. I had those nailed for a long, long time too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think, sometimes part of that problem is especially like the culture of, certain police forces, and even just, first responder jobs in general. Like you socialize with each other, and socializing always involves drinking. You work crazy hours, let's go to the pub, like, and so then when you're experiencing all of these, physical, emotional, and psychological, problems. And then, yeah, like you're saying, having those maladaptive coping mechanisms, it's can end up being a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, for sure. And it was such a long time, and I don't think that um, it was. I look back now and I go, well, how could how could anyone help me, or what did I need? And
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting because, like I felt like if I told anyone what was going on, that I wouldn't be believed, right? Like, how could someone so confident, so opinionated, be bullied and be impacted by that
Yeah.
and be affected by that? There's an
Yeah.
organisation in Australia called Beyond Blue, and they did
Yeah.
the largest mental health survey in the world of police and
Mm-hmm.
emergency services, and that showed that poor workplace practices and behaviours actually have the same amount of impact as our operational trauma. So what we
My
see when we
goodness.
go out to jobs, right? So I had them both sort of going on. I had the operational trauma of being, a general duties copper, and also being a supervisor,
Yeah.
sending my people in to get harmed, and that took a lot as well, because it wasn't only
Mm-hmm.
me. Like, if it's me, sure, I can deal with that, but I also had my
Yeah.
people um, that I was sending in to
Yeah.
be traumatized, to be hurt. And,
Yeah.
that took its toll as well. So, I had all
Yeah.
of these things going on to the point where, you sort of get up and if do you look back when you're in uniform, or even putting your yellow Freddy on, you sort of automatically have this armor. Or I look back and I go, even just putting the uniform on, you sort of stand differently. It feels different. You've got this, you've got this layer on of armor of
Yeah. Like a
something.
protective shield. Yeah. No, no, no. I do very much know. And I think as two people who've both left like an organization like that, like so like I left and then I moved over the other side of the world, and I very much felt like I'd lost a massive part of my identity, and therefore I think a certain amount of confidence too, and which I didn't anticipate, like trying to start a new life and make friends and meet people and stuff in a new country is always going to be like a bit daunting and challenging. But I think it did feel like I had, some like chinks of armor like chipped off walking away from something that I had like, yeah, equally known for so long. And it does, like, it's, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, because it is weird and it's difficult to define. um but yeah, like you did, I don't know, it was like the badge or the uniform, or just maybe the role that we sort of chose to play in society, where you're like, well, I'm here to do good. I'm here to help people, and whether that instills this beautiful sense of pride in you, that like you're there for a purpose, you're trying to do the best thing for the people of your community. So then when, yeah, you don't sort of feel like you have that anymore, it can be a little bit jarring.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I think I got to the stage where, I talk about sort of putting on a mask, right? So you get up in the morning and you go, shit, all right, what do I need today? Like, what mask am I going to put on? How can I almost hide how many, and got to the stage with me where I just had so many masks that I'd have to play, that I'd have to put on, that I'd have to pretend that oh, I've got to go socialize. I'll have to put a social mask on and try and, to the point
Yeah.
where I feel like I lost part of who I actually was. Um,
Hmm.
and that was really hard. And it got
Yeah.
to the point in my career where I think fast forward to when I was upgraded, doing some cultural work as a senior sergeant, trying to
Mhm.
working across a lot of divisions. And I asked for help. I said, and the behaviours were known, and I asked for help,
Yeah.
and no one did. So there's all
Are you
these,
serious?
yeah, so there's all these layers of complexity that just really build. So, and then I've still
Yeah.
got my nervous system just fighting me the whole way. And so
Yeah.
I don't, I'm at the stage now where, and I'm what my GP calls a super coper. So, and I look back now and I go, how did I do it? But I was getting up and, at this stage, I'm sort of in a corporate role. So I'm working Monday to Friday, 8 to
Mhm.
4.
Yep.
I'd be getting up, going to boot camp at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd be going to work and then doing my 8 or 9 hours in the office. Then I'd be coming home and doing some more work, for another couple of hours. Then I'd just
Yep.
drink and get absolutely smashed every single night. And then I'd just do it all again and I'd repeat
Yep.
it. So there was no room for much else. But yeah, and this is the thing that is probably most bothering is that I asked for help and it just wasn't there.
Okay.
It took over 2 years for something to actually be done,
And so
which is
when
a
you
long
say
time.
that you, yeah, of course. When you say that you asked for help, like, are you able to explain, like, in what capacity, or who, who, not who, but as in, like, who you reached out to, and in what way that, like, they clearly failed you?
Yeah, I think, look, I asked a lot of people for help. Like I said, what was happening was well known to a lot of people, and I'm really
Okay.
I'm very cautious that I don't want to put
Yeah.
blame onto management because I think we get in my experience it's always a them problem. Like we always say they didn't do anything, and we're
Yeah.
always referring to management or people that hold a higher rank than us. So I'm very
Yeah.
cautious that I don't want to sound like I'm placing blame on people that didn't
Mhm.
act because they obviously didn't feel safe enough to. So that's
Okay.
another part of the puzzle that we've got to look at is that no one
Yeah.
felt safe to do anything about this, right? So
Yeah.
I was having conversations with, divisional managers, so people in very high ranks. But I
Mm.
was also speaking to my subordinates about it, my peers about it. So
Yeah.
it's definitely not a them problem. I just
Yeah.
think that the system we were operating in didn't allow it didn't allow for anything to be done because people were fearful.
Mm.
So it's
And
it's it's tough.
that's a shitty culture to exist in. Like,
Yeah.
when you're the one who's on, like, the receiving end of it. Like,
Yeah, and so it got to the stage where one of the inspectors was retiring, and on their last day, they did something about it. So that just goes to show the level of safety that they weren't experiencing. That on their way out the door, they've gone, something needs to be done.
as an inspector, like, as a 150,
Yeah,
damn.
yeah, yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and then I suppose
And
from that kicked off another process, right? So there was the
mhm,
investigation process, and during that time, I was promoted to senior sergeant, so I had moved into an inner
okay,
city corporate role.
okay,
Um, but interestingly enough, the behaviours were still ongoing, so they were still being able to impact me, and impact the people around me. And
Jesus.
yeah, and we talk about taking the blue out of it with investigations, and it's obviously really hard to do.
Yeah. Yes.
But we also, I think that there needs to be a level of importance put on these sorts of investigations, and particularly with the timeline. So, to get an
Mhm.
outcome for this investigation, it took 2.5 years. So, I had been
Shit.
experiencing, 4.5 years of hell. It was absolute hell. And I remember I'd just gotten back from my honeymoon, and I was still on leave, and I got a phone call from the
Yeah.
main investigator. And
Yeah.
they said, there's been an outcome. And I said, okay. And he said, they've pled guilty. And I said, okay. And I got off the
Mhm.
phone and I fell apart. I think it was
Yeah.
like a sort of like a relief, or an ending of something. And it was at that point that I knew that I couldn't return to the workplace. I was just, I was absolutely shattered. And I just
Yeah.
think having a final outcome sort of made it real. Um,
Yeah.
But yeah, I just knew that my body could not sustain what it had been doing. It had been fighting for the
Yeah.
last 4.5 years,
Yeah.
and my body just could not. Our bodies are quite smart, right? They're so good at sending us signals about what's going on and what we need to do.
Yeah.
And I'd been
Yeah.
ignoring that. And um and at that moment in time, I just went, I just can't do this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and I think as well, it would be like a relief in terms of the fact that you're like, okay, I can like, lay down my armor, like I don't have to fight anymore. But at the same time, it sounds like them pleading guilty was also, regardless of what their reasons were for that, pleading guilty, like a massive like validation for you, because they easily probably could have dragged it out and put you through even more hell. But the fact that, they're kind of gone, oh yeah, okay, like I have to put my hand up for this because it's actually the truth.
Yeah.
Like that must have just, validation in all its forms is wonderful. But, for everything that you've just described that you've been going through to get that phone call must have just been incredible.
Yeah, it was definitely a moment in time. I can remember what I was wearing on the day. I remember where it was, who was there, all of the things. And it's quite fascinating, isn't it? Because there's a lot that I can't remember. There's a lot, especially
Yeah.
with I ended up with a PTSD diagnosis. So with that comes, the memory thing is just a nightmare. So
Yeah.
it's quite interesting that moments like that in our lives sort of really stick with us.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's really interesting and important, and I just want to say like thank you for sharing that, because you know I guess anyone who's either like knows someone in the first responder role and all that kind of thing, like I think it's important to highlight the fact that not all of our experiences are super positive. We all don't, like go in and love it, or we love it, but then like something else, like your situation happens and it makes us lose our love for it. And equally, like, I think most people now would be aware of the kind of trauma that first responders are exposed to, and you even had like a really interesting aspect that I didn't really think of because I was never in a supervisory role like a sergeant like you were. But the impact of knowing, not only do I know what I have to see, but then that feeling of responsibility of like sending your troops into that, like that was like something I'd sort of never thought about as well, which was, a completely really interesting aspect that I think you shared. But as well, though, we focus on all the external trauma, like what, like with the jobs we see, what we have to do in our role, who we have to help, and at times we see people on like literally the worst day of their lives, and we're the ones that are meant to go in there and help and pick up the pieces. But as well, you think all of your trauma is going to be through that kind of exposure and experience, but you never actually think that it's going to be coming from the internal organization and the force that you're equally a part of. Like that's just so much for you to have had to have dealt with.
Yeah, it's a lot, but I think in some way we all carry that. Like the way that we treat each other is so impactful. Like we spoke about it at the start. You remember the
Yeah.
people that gave you a chop out, right? You remember those people that helped you. You remember their names, and I
Yeah.
just I just think it's so important that there's all these systems and processes and layers in place, but at the end of the day, it just comes down to how we treat each
Mhm.
other, and how we sort of respect one another, and that's it's a huge thing.
Yeah, definitely. And so do you think, and I mean, maybe we're playing hindsight or might not be able to say, but if there hadn't been that kind of an outcome, do you think you'd still be there, or was there just a part of you that was like, no, I know that this is like the right time to walk away? Like, had you envisaged or thought about leaving the job while all of that stuff was going on?
No, and that I think that that's what probably was so powerful about it, is that, I landed my dream job. Like, I was that was my forever job, like I absolutely loved what I was doing
Mm-hmm.
in leadership development, such a niche part of the organization,
Yeah.
for a copper to be working in. And
Yeah.
I love that. So to know immediately that I just can't go back, was mind blowing. And I look back at my
Yeah.
journey, and I needed to walk away in order to, start to heal and start to recover. And obviously that's an ongoing journey.
Yeah.
But I think that that's what I finally, there was finally a moment of silence that allowed me to probably lean in and listen to what my body had been shouting at me for so many years, to go, I just can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Um, did you did you reach out for any kind of like mental health assistance during that time, or did all of that come post you leaving the organization?
No, it was pre, so probably, I'm going to say just as the investigation started, I had a couple of breakdowns at work, and I was fortunate enough, and this, the whole welfare systems within organisations is, I think, a very personal, individualised experience. So there can be horror stories
Mm-hmm.
of people, that didn't get help. I know of
Yeah.
a couple, and I think, that have died from suicide because they didn't get the help that they needed. Um,
Mm.
I was fortunate enough to have a manager that linked me in with, our internal welfare services, and
Yep.
I was able to go to a psych in work time. So that commenced,
Yep.
a couple of years before I left, and I would go see my
Okay.
psych on a weekly basis, for an hour.
Yep.
And, I was fortunate enough to be given that opportunity to A, see an internal psych, B, that I actually clicked with. And that's the thing that,
Yeah.
there's one thing to just say, yeah, I'm going to go see a psych or get psychological help. But then if the relationship's not there, or, it's not a good fit, I think that's when people go, oh, this doesn't work for me. Um,
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough that I did click, but if that hadn't had worked, I would hope that I would shop around and keep trying until I found someone that,
Yeah.
I clicked with, and that I could form that relationship with. So, um, yeah, so I did have that support, and my GP was fabulous at the time too. So having those supports in place was super
Yeah.
important. And I still see psych. I see psych every fortnight.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm yeah, it's really hard to, because I think in our different organisations are different with all the systems that they've got in place, but
Yeah.
particularly, I don't know, it's just there's chalk and cheese. Like, I hear so many stories of people that haven't gotten the help or haven't got the assistance, and I did.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah.
sort of go, I wonder what it would have been like if I hadn't have gotten that. What would have happened then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's, I mean, I know over here in the States, there's like a lot of conversations going on about kind of like exactly what you're talking about. Like, if someone finally gets the courage and, goes, okay, like I'm really at that point where like I need to go and reach out for help. And then the person that they reach out to help to either like you said, they don't click with, or I think a big thing when it comes to first responders and emergency services workers is, speaking to someone who's like culturally competent and experienced and informed. Like, you don't want to go and be talking to them about a horrible job that you went to that you're, being affected by, and you look up and they're like, you can see that you're traumatizing them from like what you're sharing,
Yeah.
and that in itself is going to then impact you. And it's, I think it's really important, like you're saying, that you were really fortunate that you clicked with that person. But yeah, like, what if you didn't? Like you're saying, like, what the fuck happens to those people who finally reach out, and it's not the experience, and it's not the help that they need. Like, those people can easily fall through the cracks. And like you said, you're aware of, some suicides, from within the organization. Like, I mean, I want to say I'm aware of like at least two this year over there, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and and then, sometimes you kind of, I know from obviously still keeping in contact with people from back there, like, sometimes you hear from ones that was like a younger sort of member, and then you can kind of go like, okay, like maybe not you get it, but as in you can understand how like someone younger and inexperienced just kind of doesn't know how to cope, doesn't have those coping mechanisms. But then sometimes you hear about someone who's, might have been in the job like 20, 30 years, and then it blows everyone out of the water,
Yeah.
because you're like, fuck,
Didn't see it
like if
coming.
that
Mm.
person was struggling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
And
think
it's
we've
really
come a
just,
long
and,
way, right? Like we have come a long way with reducing stigma around mental health and
yeah,
actually acknowledging that the shit we see isn't normal. Like
yeah,
that's that sort of goes back to the blue family, and I'm sure across emergency services, is that we see shit that no one else should. And we hold that. We
yeah,
carry that for people. And like
yeah,
even you were just saying, like, are we traumatizing our clinicians, our practitioners? Are we traumatizing them? And then we hold that too. So
yeah.
we've got a lot of shit to hold.
Impact. Yeah, and there's like that multi-layered like impact. And then even like you're saying, you were going through all of this, and you had, a partner at the time. I think you mentioned you have a couple of kids. Like, I mean, I've got young kids myself, and I can't even imagine like trying to cope with everything you were coping with, and then going, oh shit, now I've got to like go home and play mum. Like,
Yeah.
that just must have been such an extraordinarily difficult like period for you, and worrying about, fuck, am I like impacting my kids right now? Like,
Yeah. Like there's probably not so much now, but there's days that I just go, how much am I fucking my kids up every single day? Like how am I ruining them every single day by the shit that I've got to hold and what I've got to carry? And I can laugh, I can sort of laugh at it now, but I remember. So I stopped work in November 2019, and I went
okay,
from being a very successful, very career driven, orientated person to
yeah.
um, COVID hitting a couple of months later.
I was just about to think, holy shit, like that was just before the world shut down.
Yeah. So, yep. So I went to being a stay at home mum and a primary school teacher. Like, mate, really?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Just like straight away.
Straight away. And I also don't think that we've grasped what COVID has done to us. And every state, every country is different. Where I'm from, we
Yeah.
had a lot of lockdowns, and it was
Yeah.
tough. It was really, really tough. So in that sort of respect,
Yeah.
my recovery or my healing didn't start there, because I still had to hold my shit together. And I was I was never a one for being a stay-at-home mum. I think the mums that do that, fucking incredible, and don't get enough respect and honor that they deserve.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, but mate, like, try and kudos to the to the teachers that deal with children every day. Like, I remember sitting there with my daughter, and she was in, I think, grade 3 or something, And I was at the table with the kids from start of the day to the end of the day. It was mind blowing.
Yeah, making sure they were doing all of their,
Yeah,
all their
and
stuff.
so I'd try and help her with her maths, and I couldn't do it. So I'm going, oh my, I can't do grade 3 maths. Like, what the hell is going on? Maybe I should go back to the job. Maybe I should go back. I don't know. But yeah.
I think they teach them this weird new method now that I don't think
Oh,
anyone
yeah, we'll roll
understands.
with that, Erin. Thanks. Yeah, but so that
All right,
that
I'm here for you.
that was tricky too, because so it's sort of like, at what point does my recovery start? At what point can I start healing and really
Yeah,
moving on from this thing? Like, I was in the job for 42% of my whole life when I retired, right? And so
yeah,
before that, I was a kid.
yeah,
I was growing up.
yeah,
I was, youth. So you talk about that police identity thing, and I thought I was really cool with it. I thought, nah, I'm good. You don't, I'm not. This is my
yeah,
friend Hayley the cop anymore, and that's cool because I don't really need that. But it also, what I found is it
yeah.
gives us an out, right? Because as soon as you're identified as a copper or emergency services worker, it's sort of like glorified.
Mhm.
And so you can just put
Yeah,
that armor on, and you don't actually have to give anything of yourself,
yeah,
because you can rely on the police
that,
force to do that for you, right? So you can,
yeah,
so that transition, and I'm still working it out. Like, I've been retired for nearly two
yeah,
years now, and that it's still it's still hard. Like, and getting back to that, that nervous system thing, I've finally found some space in the middle of that. So my steady state, I call it. So I can, actually
yeah.
function in there. But what I've been realizing lately is that I've been sterilizing that a lot. So I've sort of
Mhm.
been making sure that I'm not open to any stimulus that could send me, to hypoarousal. And just
Yeah,
funny stuff, like, I did my first aid course a couple of months ago, and it just goes to show that police identity is just entrenched, because as I rocked up, and the man that was taking the class said, "Oh, what do you do for a job?" And I've gone, "I'm a police veteran, but I teach yoga." Because I was a bit nervous about going to the first aid course, right? Because I don't like blood and guts. That's
yeah,
never been my jam, and I knew that there was going to be some of that,
yeah,
and I didn't want that to be a trigger for me to go into that fight flight.
yeah.
But I sat down and I go, "Why the fuck did I just say that I'm a police veteran?" He asked me what I did for my job. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, oh, dude, like 100%. Like I've been out a lot longer than you, and it's still something that I feel like identifies me as, and I think it was because as well I was proud to be a cop. I loved being a cop, and like I similarly like joined when I was like baby bloody like 21,
Mm.
22 year old. All of like my formative 20s were all in the police force, and then I started my 30s with leaving and moving overseas. So it's when it's taken up such a massive chunk of your life, it's really difficult not to still feel that draw of it. And I mean, even like the work that I do now, like I do life coaching for first responders. I'm married to a first responder. A whole bunch of my friends are still first responders, and like the whole point of doing this podcast is I still feel pulled back to
Mm.
that community and still want to help. So I think once it touches you in that way, like I don't know if you ever really escape
Mm.
it. And I guess it's up to us with how we deal with that moving forward, and whether we can, you've had some like challenging experiences along the way, like whether you can end up separating that outside of the rest of it, or whether it like tarnishes it, for you for the rest of
Yeah,
forever.
I think I'm super grateful that um, I still have a sense of pride, and I still, um, I don't know. I know a lot of people that have left or are ill health retired, and they can't look
Yeah.
back at the organization and be positive. But I've really
Yeah.
tried to keep that, because I figure, how is it serving me if I'm carrying shit that I don't need to carry for the organization? Like, there was,
Yeah.
I can go into so many failures and so many, things that shouldn't have happened, but at the end of the day, it was 42% of my life. So I don't want to
Yeah.
hold that in um contempt, I suppose. I want to be able to look back and go, I can, contributed to the community. It's an amazing blue family. It's dysfunctional, like
Yeah.
I said. It's completely and utterly dysfunctional, but it still is a family, and I'm the same, Erin. Like, I feel
Yeah.
that pull with the community quite strongly, and I don't think that that'll ever go away, and nor should it. But I'm just very thankful that I can still have a positive outlook towards the organisation.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you mentioned that you're teaching now.
Yes, yeah, I'm teaching yoga. I found yoga just as I retired, and it's probably changed. It's changed my life. It's had a very significant impact on my recovery and on my mental health in a way that I
Mhm.
never thought that it would. And before I actually went to yoga,
Yeah.
I didn't even consider going to yoga. I just thought, if you
Yeah.
Google yoga, they're all very pretty, very thin, very white, and they do things that, they're bendy stuff that,
Yeah, very bendy.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And that had a profound impact um, on my life. And it was the first, like, I'm not one that can just sort of sit
Mhm.
down. So you tell me to go to the hairdressers and it's just a drag, right? Because I have to sit there for an hour and a half. Yes, I know I'm vain, so I can choose not to and
Yeah.
whatever. Um, But I go, like, imagine how much shit I could get done in this time. I remember I was at a leadership
Yeah.
development symposium or a conference or whatever, and they had people coming around to the
Mm.
tables to give out 10-minute massages as you're listening to a keynote. And I said no, because I thought it'd be wasting my time, right? So if you look at that version of Hayley and then go, okay, go do yoga
Yeah.
for an hour. And the yoga that I love doing
Yeah.
is more relaxation type of thing. So it's not.
Okay. So not like the vinyasa, like the
Yeah,
flowing
so
sort
I
of
do
one.
vinyasa, but when I first started yoga, it was a type called yin yoga, which is just like having a
Okay.
stretch and a nap all at the same time. But the first class I did, I just fell in love, and it was the first time
Yeah.
that I had felt the absence of stress in my body, and
Wow.
I was hooked. I'm like, I need this in my
Yeah.
life, and it was one of
Yeah.
the first things that I've actually done for myself. Like, I think a lot of coppers and emergency services struggle with having a hobby or other bits and pieces that doesn't
Yeah.
involve drinking, mind you, because if that was a hobby, I've
Yes, true.
got that down pat. So
Don't we all?
yeah, so I think for me it was something that I did for myself that really helped. So then I
Yeah.
thought I'll do with my best friend. We did our yoga teacher training together, and I never thought that I'd teach ever. Um,
Mhm.
and it just so happened that an opportunity came along, and now I'm teaching to first responders, and it's been amazing. It's been so much fun.
That's
Mm.
wonderful. Yeah, and that is something that we will address with Elise in an upcoming
Yeah,
episode. We're going to have both Hayley and Elise jump on together and to talk about what they're doing in the sense for first responders and with their yoga classes. So I'm very much
yeah,
looking
that'd be
forward
great.
to that conversation. Yeah. And so I guess well, yoga sounds like a much more adaptive coping mechanism for you in that sense,
Yes,
which is
yeah,
wonderful. And I'm glad that you found it. Um, but it's really incredible, like just to watch you talk about it, like the way that your face lights up and it sounds like you held your breath for like 15 years and the first time that you were able to exhale was when you found yoga.
yeah, definitely. It's been an incredible experience, and I think that that's when I really was able to start healing and to start recovering. And
Mhm.
I say that because I've had my psych support for a long time, but talk therapy
Yeah,
can't be everything. We sort of need a holistic approach to mental health recovery,
like an
and
outlet.
wellness, right? So I
Mhm.
think it's super helpful for anyone that wants to take a breath or have a combination of therapies. I think it's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah. And I guess sort of just wanting to circle back to the police department just for a little bit. Um, Obviously, your experience within that realm was, and mental health was like impacted, and we've discussed it a little bit. But do you remember, like, was anything ever spoken about, mentioned, advocated for when you joined the job in regards to, what to do with your mental health, strategies to have, and was there any mention of it at all?
No, there wasn't, and I hope that that's come a long way. I remember one of our first lessons, and I'd love to know if you had the same, but we had the letters TJF written on the whiteboard, and the law instructor turned around and said, "Does anyone know what this means?" And we've all gone, "Nah." And he goes, "The job's fucked, right? He will see shit that no one else should have to see, rah, rah, rah." And that was our introduction to mental health, is the job's fucked. So
Yeah. I know I know that phrase, and I know the, like, I think someone I know gave someone else like one of their sergeants a pen with like TJF
yeah,
on
yeah, but
it.
it's sort of cute, right? Because I catch up with a veteran community, and their slogan is TJF, and it stands for the journey forward. So I think that that's a nice little spin
Oh
on
my
it.
god.
We'll call it the journey forward.
Exactly, exactly. Well, so talking about like, that kind of like those phrases and all that sort of thing, like I've sort of talked about it before, but like I think it was organization wide about like, did you have the can of concretes in your police station?
Yeah, and the stiff shit book. Do you remember the stiff shit
Yeah.
book?
Okay, so they were
Uh,
banned or had been like revoked by the time I came
yeah,
along, which wasn't, that long after you, but as in I think, we worked in
yeah.
different areas. But yeah, but explain to me what was the premises of
The
the stiff
stiff
shit
shit
book,
book.
because I don't
So the
remember.
stiff shit book was a book that was kept in the watch house like an exercise book, far out of sight from the
Mhm.
bosses, although I'm pretty sure that they knew what was going on. But anytime anyone fucked up or
Yeah.
did something stupid, an article would be written in the stiff shit book. So, and it was hilarious. Like,
Oh
once you come
shit.
off leave, you'd come back in after having a couple of weeks off, and there'd be all these new pages added to the stiff shit book, which was hilarious.
Yeah.
Unfortunate for the people that made mistakes or, did the wrong thing. But,
Yeah.
it was, I suppose it was a way of banding together, but probably not the most
Mm,
uh, progressive or supportive way.
yeah. Yeah. And yeah, equally like so in within our organization there was this thing called there'd be like these spray cans everywhere, and they'd put like police ribbon around it, and it was almost like if you showed any kind of weakness or vulnerability or admitted that something had bothered you, it was like, or if you bitched up about something, it was like, oh, here's a can of concrete, and you'd be like, what the fuck's that for? And it's like, so you can
Fuck
harden the
up.
fuck
Yeah.
up. And that was all you knew.
Yeah.
That was like how you got taught really early on that weakness and vulnerability were not encouraged
No, not at all.
at
No,
all.
and I think that that's
No.
when I started asking for help, and like as a supervisor, because like I said, we put all this weight of expectations on managers, and
Yeah.
someone said the other day, we were talking about values, and they said, oh, when as you go up the chain, you have to have a higher level of values. And I sort of challenged it and I said, hang on a minute. So you're saying that a sergeant or a senior sergeant has to have twice the amount of values as a senior connie? Yep, yep, yep. And I'm like, mate, I was just trying to hold my shit together. Like, do you think that, you know, so I think even as ranks go up, it gets harder to show that vulnerability and to actually say, I'm not feeling
Yeah.
okay today, or I've had a really fucking rough night, I haven't slept. So I think that again, I
Yeah.
hope that we're getting better in that, but it does it's just super hard because when we first joined, it was very much that you just don't say anything about it. And if you do say something about it,
Yeah.
it's over a drink, and then everyone pats each other on the back and
Yeah.
laughs, and life goes on.
Yeah. Yeah. Or get, fucking Izzy had a
Yeah,
meltdown and it ends up in the
yeah,
stiff shit book.
exactly.
Like, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
And yeah, and I mean, and I think um I know sort of towards the end of my time in uniform, they'd were they still doing it? They'd So when we used to do night shifts, we would do like 7 nights straight, and then you'd do what was called a quick changeover. So you'd finish at 7 a.m. and you'd come back to work at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And then at 11 p.m., when everyone finished, everyone who was on that crew for the week used to go to the pub and invariably get fairly
hmm
shit faced, but it was also our opportunity to kind of debrief. It was basically like an unofficial alcohol fueled debrief where we would all laugh about things that happened during the week, and then but also just like talk about it and get it out. And I think they stopped that, which, I mean, look, like, operationally probably a lot safer. And I would think the level of complaints on a Sunday
yeah,
afternoon definitely went down when you have like tired coppers who were just really not wanting to be in daylight. um Definitely would have made a difference. But did you sort of notice like a change in, like the level of camaraderie or support after there was that
massively. And I
shift?
think that that's such a big, again, it's not an adaptive strategy, right? But to get people talking about things that were happening during the week. And I do think that cut a lot of it off. Necessarily, I'd probably say for a safety
Yeah.
risk reason. But it wasn't really replaced with anything else. And I
Mm,
sort of go, you can still, to some degree, you can still get around the watch house counter and talk about stuff. And, beyond policing, I look at our
yeah.
other emergency services counterparts who are volunteers. And I sort of go, where's their time? Because they go to a job and then they go back to their other work.
Yeah.
So I think that
Yeah.
there's just so much work that needs to be done in this space. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't necessarily know what it looks like other than getting shit face after a night shift. Like, and then will people go? Because whilst there is this reduction of the stigma around mental health, that I think it's still very much alive and well. Like, I think that if you were to say to someone, if someone was having mental health issues, would you help them? They would say absolutely yes. But then asking the question, if you had mental
Yeah.
health issues, would you talk to someone about it? I think the answer would be very different. So whilst
Yeah.
generally
Yeah.
coppers are quite supportive of people that are going through mental health issues in this day and age, I still think that there's a reluctance of people to come
Mhm.
forward to say, "Hey, I'm just not traveling too well."
Yeah. Yeah. And what about so when at the stage when I left the job, if the policy seemed to be if you attended what was deemed quote unquote like a critical incident, there was like an automatic email sent out from like the welfare department. And it wasn't, I don't really remember it being personalized. It was, hello, I'm contacting you because you attended blank event, insert trauma in there. And, you know, just like reiterating the fact that there were people that we could reach out to or whatever else. That advanced in any way, shape, or
Not
form
really.
in
Like
the
I
last, you know?
remember there was another system that came into place, and um, levels of incidents would be categorized because we're very good at categorizing stuff. And if it
Yeah,
came up in a certain
of course.
category,
And acronyms,
oh
don't
yes,
forget the
acronyms all
acronyms.
over it. And so I remember one night shift, I was 251, so I was a sergeant, and I had my offsider who
Mm-hmm.
was quite inexperienced, but he was sort of like my little brother. So I was, you know,
Yeah.
great man. And um, we pulled over this car that this dude had a knife and drugs on him. And we'd
Mm-hmm.
sort of just talking to him, and then he flipped and he started laying into my offsider. And again, as a sergeant, it's just an added level of like, you know, it was a horrible incident, right? And the added fact that
Yeah.
this crook would only get stuck into him and not me was, I found really just an,
Yeah.
yeah, I just found that really interesting. Anyway, everything was fine, but it really shook me up because
Mm-hmm.
this was probably at the height of
Yeah.
my well, it was at the height of, yeah, of
Everything going
everything
on.
going on. So my resilience probably wasn't great, my tolerance probably wasn't great, and I just felt like I was carrying everyone else's shit, right? And on the
Yeah.
crossover of the morning, the incoming sergeant said, "Just noticed that you had that incident. Are you all right?" And I said, "No, actually, I'm not." He laughed at me, turned around, and walked away.
Oh,
Right? So we can have a system in place that says, okay, this category happens, you need to check in with someone. But then if that's the response, what do you do with that?
yeah. What's the confidence level going forward? Yeah. That's, oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you, Hayley. That's
Yeah,
fucking
it's
awful.
sort of like, well, how many times do you have to ask for help? Like we've got all these systems in place. If people are asking for help, that means that they need it. Like I said, like coppers, emergency services,
Yeah.
and maybe the community in general aren't really good at asking for help.
Yeah.
So when someone does, it means that they probably really fucking need it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they may be like teetering on the fucking edge and the precipice
Yeah.
of like something, you know, yeah, way more. Like I remember I actually remember one of those instances. I had like a pretty awful suicide. And I got one of those like pro forma ones, and it was always on night shift and all that kind of thing. And the crew we actually had, like the bloke I was working with was, you know, a ripper guy, and we were sort of there to support each other. And then we went to I wasn't actually working at my home station. I was working at like the sister station, and we went back to my home station like the next night, and you know the whole crew were like, fuck Ezzy, we listened to that job, we were on like tenderhooks, are you okay, it sounded awful, blah blah blah. And there was like a sergeant there I knew that I got along really well with, and he was really lovely, and then we were like
Yeah.
fucking shaken up. It was a really tough job. And then I got that pro forma email from the welfare department, and I I guess maybe it was just because I needed to get it out, and I actually responded. Like I responded to the email and wrote this like big long thing of like, oh yeah, it was actually really tough and blah 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 and this and that. Then I got like a response from the bloke, and I would have no idea what his name is now, but he was actually touched that I
Oh.
responded. And I was like, oh, it's actually really sweet, because it was like, yeah, you know what, I at that fucking moment I needed that outlet. And then he I think he forwarded me, or even someone else like read the IFS, and the particular way that the person had taken their life and completed suicide was slightly unusual. And so they were like, oh hey, I read this on the IFS, or like the information thing that used to go around. and they were like, oh, like, you know, I had to investigate a suicide, like this will help you out because of like A, B, and C, and like sent me resources and stuff so I could like do the inquest
Amazing.
brief. So, you know, in that respect, like, you know, sometimes the troops could be amazing, and that like you're like, you know, and like we all talk about like the thin blue line family, like thin red line, like, you know, all of them, but then equally then you can have those really shitty encounters with, you know, with someone like that sergeant, when like how can you stare someone in the face when they've gone, yeah, I'm actually having like a really fucking rough time, like
Yeah.
that shook me up, like, and then just like turn
Yeah.
their back on you. Like the person I worked with for that job
Mm.
left the job, and from my understanding, like that job that we attended together, that was clearly like the straw
Yeah.
that broke the camel's back, and I never would have anticipated that from him. Like, you know, we never really sort of spoke about it after like that night shift. It was just like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, whatever. And then like, you know, I think next thing I knew, he was gone. I never
Yeah.
fucking
And
saw him again. You
I
know,
think that that
like
just
it's
highlights
just,
that it's the little things that can really matter. Like you imagine those people that whose job it
mm,
is to send out the critical incident emails. They know what the job is, and no one ever replies. And a simple reply, you
yeah,
know, means that
yeah,
that person's job is being fulfilled, sort of a thing. And people asking you, "Hey, here's
yeah. They see
yeah,
them
are you
worth in it.
okay? Here's something that helped me out. You might like to have a look." Like very, very small things can be
Yeah.
so impactful and so huge.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think you're right. Like I think sometimes that the camaraderie that exists probably just more amongst like the, we would call them the ORs, like the other ranks. So like the, you know, sort of all the lower level troops who are really just like out on the road answering job to job to job. I sort of always felt like that level of camaraderie was always really, you know, really strong and thick, and the bond that you had with those kind of people was always good. But it sort of sounds like it wasn't always that way, like the higher you climbed up the ranks. And I wonder whether that, you know, was just like a level of like, you know, disassociation, that they felt like, you know, disconnected from it, or there was like that competitive level of like, oh well, I can't show any weakness because I want to climb the ranks, so I have to just be stoic and not give a fuck. Like, you know, I really wonder what it
Yeah,
is in that
I think you
respect.
probably covered all of the bases. I do think that it's a level of competitiveness. Like as you go up, the amount of knowledge that you're expected to know and to hold increases dramatically. And you know that there
Yeah,
is, you know, you are looking after people, you're supervising people, you're managing people. So the accountability gets bigger.
yeah,
And if you show any weakness, it's just not as tolerate. It's just not tolerated. Full stop. Um, yeah. So and
yeah,
you lose, like there's a huge loss in being promoted too, because especially that promotion to sergeant, you do lose that camaraderie with the ORs. You do lose that. That's removed from you because it's expected that you lift your professionalism.
yeah,
You know, it's hard to sort of muck around
yeah,
with the crew and then um, you know, send them into war basically. So that can be quite tricky to navigate. But I definitely saw as,
yeah.
you know, as the ranks progress, that vulnerability was less tolerated, all of that sort of stuff. So I think
Mm.
you've hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and I think you know, being in the space I am sort of like over here, I've been really fortunate to connect with like some people on like online and Instagram, through like, you know, there's an organization that I'm connected and affiliated with called the Overwatch Collective, and there's another guy by the name of Travis, and he does, his organization's called My Arena, and he is like an ex SWAT, like 20 plus years, like so amazing and experienced and, you know, like tested in that respect. and he spends his time going around the country talking to first responders, especially coppers, about his like PTSD diagnosis and the dramas he's had, and about, you know, getting help, going to therapy, you know, participating in EMDR to help like with some of, you know, his out like ongoing trauma. And that's, and you know, he's just like one example that I can think of off the top of my head, but there's just so many out there that you kind of go like, if only some of those people who are so resistant could actually see how impactful it is of someone of significant rank and significant experience to actually turn around and go, no, you know what, like, yeah, you think I'm fucking
Yeah.
bulletproof, I'm not. And like, I got hit and I got affected and I got fucked up, but the silver lining is that like,
Yeah.
I got help,
Yeah.
and you can too. And that is impactful for like, you know, and that ability to be vulnerable. You can be strong and resilient, and if you want to be masculine or like, you know, whatever else, that's fine. But if you want to be, you know, all of those things, but then also allow yourself that compassion and vulnerability, like, it's so impactful. And that's what will really get through to like those lower level troops, not being a fucking
Yeah.
asshole and not showing any feelings. It's it's frustrating that you know, that hangover like
Yeah.
still fucking lingers, you
Yeah,
know.
for sure.
um okay, I think we are almost coming to an end. um so first of all, I just want to say thank you for coming on and sharing your story with me and with anyone who's taken the time to listen. I think it is really important to highlight that, you know, people can have such a varied experience in, you know, the first responder realm and in their roles, and I'm sorry yours, you know, wasn't exactly probably what you anticipated, and maybe you left under circumstances that were very challenging and weren't great at the time. But it sounds like you know, are in a really good place now and have found something that you equally love. So I'm really happy
Thank you
for you in
so
that
much.
regards,
And
Hayley.
thanks for taking the time to hear my story.
Cool. I like to finish off our podcast conversations by asking two final questions of our guests. So the name of the podcast is I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness. And that simply is a reflection of, you know, that I think that an element of darkness sort of like underlies our role as first responders and emergency services personnel. And, you know, that's the whole point of this podcast, is to, you know, shine light on that level of darkness and share our stories and our experiences and share things that help us cope. So, you know, my first question is, what do you do to hold space for your darkness? And we may have sort of gone over it a little bit already, but you know, regardless whether it's sort of something that you do now, something that you did at the time, you know, what has helped you cope the
I
most?
think that that's always going to be an ongoing journey. But
Mm-hmm.
I try and look at my darkness through the lens of um, compassion and kindness. And, you know, the human brain is wired to default to being negative. And, you know, emergency services, particularly police, are known for being judgmental because that's how we keep safe. We have to judge and assess
Mm-hmm.
where we are throughout the day.
Yeah.
And that's always been a pretty big thing for me. I'm quite judgmental and quite harsh on myself, and my inner critic is very, very loud. Um, so, and you know, I
Mm-hmm.
learnt this through yoga, is to really move away from judgment and come back to compassion and to kindness. So, I now
Yep.
will say things like my productivity does not determine my worth. Things like I don't need to earn my rest and I'm worthy of rest. And just to keep on coming back to that, it's not always perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but just to allow myself to be.
Yep.
And it's a hard practice.
Mhm.
It's really hard. But then
Yep.
that allows me to breathe, to honor my darkness, but to still have space um, for moments of joy and delight and all of the good things.
Yep. I love that answer. That was brilliant. And I can just say that I really agree. I think that having or learning to have self-compassion is incredibly difficult because it's
No.
not something that we're taught. It's actually something that you have to actively learn and think about and like you're saying, challenge that inner critic, that inner voice, that everything that when, says that you yourself are a fuck up or you do everything wrong, like actually learning to have that compassion for yourself. It's
Mm,
so powerful and so just wonderful in terms of changing your perspective and
yeah.
changing your mindset. So I 100% agree with that. And lastly, it's you sort of just told us like what you do to be able to hold space for your darkness. What is something that a loved one can do for you in terms of like supporting you to be able to like hold space for your darkness, and what can they help you with the most in terms of like when things feel overwhelming and upsetting, what can someone do for you in that
For me,
respect?
for me, it's again about the little things, and I think people that haven't experienced, um, I don't. I mean, most people would have experienced some sort of trauma, but for people that um, probably talking more outside the job. So my husband's not in the job, my family were never in the job, but
Mhm.
I sometimes feel that they are scared to ask me how I am because what does that mean for them if I say I'm not well? So does that mean for them that
Yep.
my husband's a ripper for this and he's learnt over, very slowly over years to not try and fix things. So for me, it's making space for a conversation without having to fix or to jump in. And I think people are so scared that if I ask someone who I know is not traveling well how they're traveling and they say not well, what do I have to offer to fix that? And for me, it's really just about making space. So, and my husband does this perfectly. If he knows that I've had a really rough night of sleep and nightmares and all of that sort of stuff, he'll just simply say, "Do you want to talk about it?" And 9 times out of 10, the answer is no, right? But just by him offering that is enough. And, to say,
Mhm.
because
Yep.
I'm actually quite surprised about how many people don't say, "How are you? Are you okay? How are you traveling?" And I think it's don't be scared to
Yep.
ask the question because you don't have to fix, you don't have to go into solution mode as humans default to. It's
Mhm.
about just allowing space for that person to have the opportunity to talk, and they'll talk or not, that's their choice. But
Yep.
just to say, "How you traveling? How you doing? Do you want to talk about it?" That's enough for me. It's all about the little things. It doesn't have to be huge.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that's powerful in itself, just offering, like literally offering the
Yeah.
space just to listen. I think that is sometimes really, really helpful and really beneficial. And is it just a husband thing where they want to fucking fix everything? I swear to God, they're all the
Yep.
same.
Yeah, it's
I know it's probably not just a first responder. It's very much a first responder thing, but I
yeah,
think it's
yeah,
I think it's a husband thing
absolutely.
too. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
you're not alone there. All right, Hayley. Well, thank you so much for your time. I've
Thank
really
you.
enjoyed our conversation. And I'm really looking forward to our future chat with when we jump on with you and Elise to have you guys talk about your yoga practices and teachings with
Yes, that'll be
first
fun. Thank you so
responders.
much for having me.
No worries. All right. So this was another episode of I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness. I'm your host, Erin Jane.